Well, yes, and one of the key architects of that historic agreement here in Paris 6 years ago, of course, the former French Prime Minister Laurent Fabius, and he indeed introduced Alok Sharma today. I grabbed him as he left the building and asked him, 19 days out now from Glasgow, is he optimistic?
Paris has been the landmark, and now Glasgow has to be the COP of action, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Now, Alok Sharma doesn't exactly do drama and passion, but I think he came pretty much as close to it as he's done yet in today's speech. An absolute rallying call to get the G20 countries, all of them, to act. He did. I think if there's one takeaway for people to understand about COP coming up, this marathon 2-week affair, great halls, great exhibitions, thousands of delegates, it is simply this. This thing will work or this thing will fail by whether those G20 big economies step up to the mark and deliver a green carbon revolution. So we started, though, there are some optimistic straws in the wind. One, of course, is the decision to set up a $100 billion a year fund from rich countries to poorer economies to decarbonise. We started on that point with the president of the COP, Alok Sharma.
Well, as I've said, we're going to set out a delivery plan before COP26. And we are within touching distance, but that's why it's so important that every country that's not yet done so come forward with new announcements on finance so we can include this as part of the package. And I think this is a matter of trust. This is a figure that has been talked about since 2009, and it's high time that it was delivered. It's what developing nations absolutely want to see.
There is momentum, isn't there, towards Glasgow? There was a breakthrough yesterday on cutting methane, for instance.
Well, I think it's incredibly positive, and I think it is a great initiative. We've seen the EU and US come together. The UK were one of the first on the track, so to speak, in signing up to this. And I think it will make a huge, huge difference if countries do sign up and then deliver on their commitments.
Now, you've been very clear today. Fail or succeed in Glasgow, it comes down to the G20. If there isn't a split, there's certainly a twin-track approach in timings, isn't there? We're still waiting for Mexico, for Russia, for China. Should we be worried?
Well, we've got 19 days to go to COP. All the G20, as I said, signed up in Naples to come forward with more ambitious, enhanced NDCs before COP26 itself.
That's their big plan for COP, the contribution.
So now is the time to deliver. And I'm hopeful that we are going to see announcements that will come through. But those NDCs are absolutely critical. And that was my very clear message today to all leaders, but particularly the G20, because what they do absolutely matters. They can be make or indeed break for the climate.
John Kerry said, and I quote, "The definition of insanity is subsidising the problem you're trying to solve." Do you agree that we should get rid of oil and gas subsidies?
Well, one of the things that I've said very clearly, that we want this COP to be the COP that consigns coal power to history. And that's been a big focus.
I'm talking about oil and gas subsidies.
No, I understand that. You've seen the commitments that have been made at the G7 meeting that actually I co-chaired in June, where the minister said that we would overwhelmingly decarbonise our economies into the 2030s.
Yeah, but I'm asking about subsidies, oil and gas subsidies. Sure. Should they go?
Sure. I think every country, and this is something that I recognise in the speech, every country starts from a different position. What we have said from the UK's perspective is that we will ensure that any future licenses on oil and gas will be looked at in relation to our commitment to net zero by 2050. There will be climate compatibility checkpoint that will be looked at, and more details of that will be set out by the business.
But do the subsidies need to go? John Kerry describes them as insane.
Yeah.
Are they insane?
Well,
is he right?
Well, as I said, my job is to build consensus around the world.
It is not made any easier when your government cannot prevent a new coal mine being built in Cumbria and cannot, it seems, prevent new oil fields, the Cambo oil field, for instance, west of Shetland, being developed. Why should people around the world listen to the UK government when we're doing that?
Well, I think in terms of the coal mine that you've talked about, there is no coal mine. There's been a public inquiry. We'll see the outcome of that. And again, there's been consultations on Canberra that you referred to.
But in Canberra, the government was kicking and screaming. They said it's a matter for local government until they were forced not to do it. That cannot make your job any easier.
Well, the key point is that this was called in. There was a public inquiry, and now let's wait and see what the outcome of that is.
Do you get a sense that the likes of Vladimir Putin, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Scott Morrison in Australia, do they get it?
Yeah, I think all countries get it, and
those individuals.
I have been obviously talking to countries around the world. I've spoken to well over 100 governments, some of them world leaders, ministers, chief negotiators. The one thing that absolutely every single country recognises is that climate change is affecting them and their populations. They understand that climate change does not recognise borders.
Well, Alex, I want to turn to matters rather closer to home here in Leeds, because across the North York moors and Yorkshire Dales, the annual burning of moorland on country estates has begun. I just wonder whether thousands of acres on fire is necessarily a great look for the government in the run-up to COP.
Well, yeah, speaking of looks, look at this. These pictures were filmed by Greenpeace across North Yorkshire just in the last week or so. Now, the campaign group Wild Moors, for instance, says this puts huge amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. You can see the smoke clearly, of course. Harms the peat, which is vital storage for carbon, of course. Some 3.2 billion tonnes in the UK alone. Globally, indeed, peat stores twice as much carbon as rainforests. But landowners say they're keen to burn it because it allows more grouse to breed, and many estates, including those owned by the Queen, have been legally burning for years. Groups like the Moorland Association say that done properly, it doesn't harm the peat. But there is the issue of the smoke, of course. And the government has brought in a ban to curb the practice, but it only applies to 8% of peatland. That's our deepest peat moors. So in the run-up to COP, and indeed the delivery of what COP is going to decide, pressure on these kind of practices is only going to intensify.